Hi, I'm Stephen Downs.
And I'm Adam Risby.
And this is Letters to the Sky, a podcast about the metaphysical iconoclasts, philosophical visionaries, and religious leaders of the world.
Whether you consider yourself religious, spiritual, neither, or something in between, we invite you to take a deep dive with us down metaphysical rabbit holes and learn to see your life from a new perspective.
Hey, Adam.
Stephen Downs.
How's it going?
It's a warm evening here in Tucson, Arizona.
That is how it's pronounced. That's very good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tucson. That's how they say it around here.
As the movie Hamlet 2 describes it, the place where dreams go to die.
You said that when I first got the job to come here. My dreams have not died, Stephen. They've only continued to flourish.
No, I mean, it's a comedy movie, and I think it was, being hyperbolic. Okay, so anyway, guys, we're using cameras today. So if you listen to this on Spotify, we're starting to put these up on YouTube because apparently people like seeing faces, and they like seeing faces on the primary face app called YouTube. So we're recording this, obviously just audio, but also video. So if you want to see our ugly mugs, go to YouTube and look up Letters to the Sky, and we'll be there. And hopefully we'll make a tradition out of this. Hopefully this isn't a horrific failed experiment. Spoiler alert, I'm wearing a towel, and it's because there's no AC in my house. We bought it last October and said, we could deal. Turns out I need to now wear a wet towel at all times to cool myself off and prevent heat stroke. And it's not even hot out today, so we'll see. This is great. Definitely, what are you going to do?
You definitely got a post-gym look to you, like you just had a great, satisfying workout, and you kind of walked out of the gym with the towel out over your...
We'll go with that. And then I kept wearing it while recording. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm here in my my wife and I's art studio / sometimes workplace.
She shed?
Yeah, she shed, yeah. And then, Adam, you are in a bedroom in your sprawling estate, right?
That's right. Yeah, I'm in the east wing of my estate.
Yeah, there you go. I love it. Okay, so on to business. So today we are talking about Stoicism, which I have to say is, right away, I'm not even going to say it's iconoclastic. It's really exceptional, though, so we wanted to bring it in. A lot of the philosophies that we've talked about, I think are... We've really spun them as iconoclastic. Maybe some of them you think are, some of them you aren't. I actually don't really feel that Stoicism's that iconoclastic. I think it's really wise, and I think it's still worth talking about, though.
Yeah, actually, that's a really good point. There's so much of Stoicism that has made it into popular culture. It is super popular now amongst...
It's the philosophy of 30-year-old male entrepreneurs.
Yeah. It totally is. Ryan Holiday is one of the biggest proponents. He's on Daily Stoic. He's got a YouTube channel, of course. And let's see who else. But it's also big amongst politicians. The particular book that we're covering, I felt, in case we didn't cover Stoicism again, which is a possibility unless it turns out to be a favorite of listeners, is a book called Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. For those of you who recognize the name, Marcus Aurelius
he was in Gladiator.
No, that's Maximus Decimus Meridius, father to a murdered son, husband to a murdered wife, and he shall have his revenge in this life or the next.
And who was the emperor?
I have no idea.
Are you kidding me?
I forget. Who was emperor? Oh, he was a son. Wasn't he like the son of Marcus Aurelius?
No, that's Commodus.
Oh, yeah. Commodus.
Are you going to really...
Wait,
I'm
no.
looking this up.
Marcus Aurelius... Are you saying Marcus Aurelius was the emperor at the time of that movie?
Yeah.
Oh, really? God, I totally did not realize that.
They even talk about his son Commodus in this book.
Yeah. Wow. That did not make that connection.
Really? All I could see was...
Gladiator the whole time.
Commodus doing the thumbs down in the arena.
Yeah.
Joaquin Phoenix being Joaquin Phoenix.
I was so caught up in the story.
Yeah, it's Marcus Aurelius.
Yeah, you're right. But he's the old man. He's not Commodus.
Yeah. No. Joaquin Phoenix is Marcus Aurelius' son, who, we learned about in this book, did not follow in his father's footsteps and was a tyrant. turns out. He didn't, guys, spoiler alert, he didn't actually die in a gladiatorial arena versus Russell Crowe. Just in case y'all aren't history buffs, I'm going to spoil it for you right now. Gladiator was not completely true.
That's true. Although Russell Crowe was a gladiator and he is immortal.
Absolutely. Russell Crowe has been fighting for millennia. There's a famous South Park episode where Russell Crowe and his sidekick, Tugger the tugboat, go travel around the world for a TV show where he fights random people. And I mean, it's a documentary, basically. He's been doing it for thousands of years. We're off to a great start this episode.
Yeah, we've covered impressive material here. Okay, back to what I was saying. So,
okay, I guess.
Marcus Aurelius, this guy, seems like my impression of him is that he's a very humble man. And he lived in the 2nd century. I think like 170 AD. No, yeah. Am I way off here? Anyway,
the book's in front of you. Let's see. I'll look. You keep talking. I'll look it up,
yeah.
and
Stephen's
going to
confirm these dates for me, but suffice it to say, it was roughly 2,000 years ago, and he was the last of a line of emperors of the Roman Empire. 5 of them in a row that were considered the peaceful emperors, and that particular time in Rome was a very relatively peaceful time. There were wars, and he was fighting off, barbarian hordes and whatnot. And there was a war in Armenia, or what was now Armenia at that time, and he was definitely tried as an emperor. But the powerful thing is Stoicism is a philosophy, it seems, that can be utilized by and applied to any human being. It's not unique to the aristocracy. Marcus Aurelius was an emperor of Rome, but one of his teachers, in fact, he actually quotes from a teacher of his by the name of Epictetus, who wrote the Enchiridion. Epictetus famously was a slave and eventually gained his freedom, but the years of slavery actually, forged him and his character in powerful ways. And so you have a slave who learned tremendous insights, categorized as Stoicism, that then an emperor learned from and was grateful for. I find that so fascinating that kind of dichotomy can exist within the same philosophy.
Absolutely. And I mean, we were talking about this a little bit before we started recording, but the book itself is really interesting because it was Marcus Aurelius's personal journal, essentially. Like, it was never written to be publicly read. And so there's really not, it's interesting because, it's written without the audience in mind other than, Marcus himself. But at the same time, it's written in a way that's supremely useful to me, right? To me, picking up and reading it 2,000 years later. It's exceptional.
It's actually, we call it Meditations, or it was renamed Meditations, but actually the title on the top of the book that was found to contain this actually said "to himself."
Absolutely. Which
is basically like notes to himself, which is
really
nice. And you can kind of see, I have this really interesting vision as I was reading this of like, a man at night at his study saying, "All right, Marcus, don't forget this. Marcus, you know better. Don't do it." Like giving himself little reminders.
Absolutely. Well, since we've already talked for a good 10 minutes now, you want to talk about what Stoicism is?
I would love to. Thank you.
I don't think we should mention it the entire episode, personally. I think we should just go ahead, not mention what it is the entire time.
Well, who's to say we know what it is? We have an impression of... What's that face?
You have no shame. Do you ever hear like someone at a big public event like make a pun on stage, and there's that one person in the audience who boos them? That's me.
That's you.
I'm booing them for making the
Boo.
pun. Boo. So my shaking my head was shaming you for making... go ahead. It was a good transition. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I can rely on you for one thing.
To interrupt your train of thought.
Cold water.
That's true. That's very true.
So basically, Stoicism, the word actually, when someone thinks of a person who is Stoic, you think of someone who has a stiff upper lip. They're very serious. They're very maybe thoughtful. They're very logical, and they're emotionless, right? That's the adjective of the word Stoic. But that is not where the word came from in reference to this philosophy. The word Stoic was used to describe the students of one of the first teachers of Stoicism, Zeno of Citium. And Zeno of Citium actually traveled to Athens to found a school where he took a lot of the thoughts that he had about life and how to live a good, virtuous life and how not to suffer psychologically, but how to do what he thought was right. And he founded a school because people did those kind of things. And he spoke from a square platform in Athens that actually looked like a porch. And it was a painted porch. It had some murals and frescoes and whatnot. And people would say, let's meet at the painted porch. And in ancient Greek, I'm going to butcher this, but the name for painted porch is stoa poikile. And stoa poikile, it means painted porch. Stoa is the porch aspect of it. And so a student of the porch is a Stoic. So it actually has nothing to do with the term or the adjective Stoic. However, there is this interesting aspect of Stoicism that asks you to be dispassionate with the events of the world, to look upon things objectively, and it favors someone who is not ruled by the passions, which is to say lust and greed, envy, anger, like to not be ruled by emotions, but rather to be their master. And I think that's why they kind of overlap, the term at least.
Sure. Yeah. And I think Stoicism, in my reading of it from Meditations, and there seems to be there's a Venn diagram of like Madhyamaka Buddhism and Stoicism, and there's a lot of overlap there. So I appreciated a lot of it. I thought a lot of it was extremely wise. It doesn't go to the depth that Buddhism does, but it doesn't have to. It's a really lovely philosophy, and it's something that it's easy to take seriously and it's easy to use. And I think that's incredibly valuable.
Not everything is a competition, Stephen.
I disagree.
When I first proposed this,
if you know me and how competitive I am, and what a overachiever I am.
When I first proposed doing an episode on Stoicism to Stephen, I don't know what you said, but you were ready to shit all over it, just like.
Yeah, but I do that to everything.
Yeah, it's
like
true.
there's very little between you and I. If you mention something, I immediately criticize it. I think you have it too easy in life. I think you have too many people that like and respect you, and
that's fair.
I want to make sure you stay humble.
I've earned it though, with blood, sweat, and tears.
Okay, whatever you say, buddy. If that lets you sleep at night.
Okay, Stoicism. Tell me, do you have a quote for us, Stephen, to kick us off?
I do. Okay, I do have a quote. So this is on page 140.
It's a very quotable book, by the way.
Actually, it is. We're going to try not to make the entire thing a quote off. Wait, no, it's not page 140. Oh, God. Wait, I have it written down. I don't need the page. Okay, 104. Page 104.
Close.
It's number 15 on 104.
Okay.
Remember, you shouldn't be surprised that a fig produces figs, nor the world what it produces. A good doctor isn't surprised when his patients have fevers, or a helmsman when the wind blows against him. So I love this quote, and the reason why I love this quote is a long time ago when I was first really deeply getting into non-duality, I was reading a book by some guy who's alive currently, and he said, a lot of people think that I don't trust people, that I am a pessimist, that I'm always looking out for the bad things. And I think you could say that there's a little pessimism and stoicism, but he's saying, I actually trust people completely. I trust them to be human, right? Like he doesn't expect unreasonable things out of other people. And that comes from knowledge of himself, right? That comes from knowing that I am a limited person, there's a limited personality here. I'm not everything that I want to be. I have those personal limitations that sometimes I'm less honest than I want to be, or sometimes I get angrier than I want to be, or whatever it may be. And to understand that other people are the exact same way, and that you don't have to expect, you don't have to be disappointed when people act like people and the world acts like, the world in this case, that things are happening, you don't have control over them, you may not like them. That doesn't change, a wise person, quote, for lack of a better word, expects it.
Yeah, that actually reminds me a lot of one of the concepts that I came across when reading about Stoicism, which is the idea of amor fati, which means the love of fate. And there's this very interesting thing, which is that things happen. So I think, first of all, Nietzsche said that, and he said that thousands of years after it was first expressed in Stoicism. But the idea is like Marcus Aurelius would say what happened was supposed to happen. And many people would even classify Stoicism as having a sort of soft determinism or a softly
absolutely.
deterministic way of looking at the world. And I can see how that actually would help people, especially people who are suffering, because it says, listen, this was supposed to happen, or there is an intelligence that knows better than you, and this happened for a reason. And so what Marcus Aurelius would do, at least I got the impression here, is that if something bad happened, he said, yeah, but this having happened allowed me the opportunity to do this and this, to learn this and this, and to help this and that person. And that I found was interesting because to me it was not so much, I didn't care so much about the deterministic outlook on life, which we could go into and all that, but it was more that he had mental fortitude. He was able to reframe an event or a situation in his life in such a way that he stopped becoming its victim. But he really owned it, and he said, yeah, this is meant to happen. And he said this is part of the logos, which is roughly, I think, his equivalent of God or the universe or whatever, but logos meaning law, right? So this is the divine law. It's the universe functioning as it's supposed to function. And this is very reminiscent of cognitive behavioral therapy or modern forms of psychotherapy, which I think is funnily enough, stumbled upon these same truths.
Absolutely. I want to read a little bit. This is a great chance for me to read about Stoic cognition. So the quote unquote theory of cognition for Stoics. So this is from the introduction. It's XXVII, and it's speaking about cognition. So it says, we have seen that for the Stoics, universal order is represented by the logos, which Adam, you just mentioned. The logos infuses and is wielded by our hegemonikon, literally, that which guides, which is the intellective part of our consciousness. In different contexts, it can approximate either will or character, and it performs many of the functions that English speakers attribute to the brain or the heart, which is interesting if you think about Buddhism. Anyway. One of its primary functions is to process and assess the data we receive from our senses. At every instant, the objects and events in the world around us bombard us with impressions. As they do so, they produce phantasia, a mental impression. From this, the mind generates a perception, hypolepsis, which might be best compared to a print made from a photographic negative. Ideally, this print would be an accurate and faithful representation of the original, but it may not be. It may be blurred, or it may include shadow images that distort or obscure the original. Chief among these are inappropriate value judgments, the designation as good or evil of things that in fact are neither good nor evil. For example, my impression that my house has just burned down is simply that, an impression or report conveyed to me by my senses about an event in the outside world. By contrast, my perception that my house is burned down and I have thereby suffered a terrible tragedy includes not only an impression, but also an interpretation imposed upon that initial impression by my powers of hypolepsis. It is by no means the only possible interpretation, and I'm not obliged to accept it. I may be a good deal better off if I decline to do so. It is, in other words, not objects and events, but the interpretations we place on them that are the problem. Our duty is therefore to exercise stringent control over the faculty of perception with the aim of protecting our mind from error. Do you see why it sounds so much like Buddhism?
Yeah.
You get it now?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so it's this idea that a thing happened. It's my choice with my ability to reason, my ability to pause, to reflect. I have the ability to choose how I react, to choose how I interpret it, which is, I think it's brilliant. I think it's a beautiful philosophy. I love it. I love that part.
It is, thank you for sharing, because I think this is, I've heard a guy named Brian Johnson, who's also a proponent of Stoic philosophy, say that one of the primary tenets of Stoicism, it has to do with locus of control. Do not worry about that which is out of your control. The only thing that's within your control is how you perceive things. So your thoughts, and then to a certain extent behavior, but there are aspects to behavior that are conditioned from upbringing and from one's psychology and all of that. But one's perception, and Marcus Aurelius talks a lot about the only thing that he can control is his mind, which again, it has a lot of Buddhist overtones. Let me share two quotes that I think gets at that exact idea, which is locus of control. Okay, this is actually the very first sentence in book 2, page 17. Page 17. When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. They are like this because they can't tell good from evil. But I've seen the beauty of good and the ugliness of evil, and have recognized that the wrongdoer has a nature related to my own, not of the same blood or birth, but the same mind, and possessing a share of the divine. And so none of them can hurt me.
You know what this really reminds me of? And I'm going to make another Buddhist reference, but I think you'll appreciate it. He reminds me of Shantideva in the Bodhicharya Avatara.
Yes!
This is basically the Roman Bodhicharya Avatara. This is like a guide for life. And all of these themes, I mean, except for like the wisdom chapter in the Bodhicharya Avatara, are also here. It's really exceptional, like truly an exceptional book.
So what Stephen's referring to is a book called The Way of the Bodhisattva by a Buddhist saint, teacher, scholar named Shantideva, who was, I think at one point, a student and member of Nalanda, a super famous Buddhist university in India many, many, many years ago, hundreds of years ago, and he was an iconoclast.
It's true, but we're not.
We're not talking about that.
We'll cover Shantideva in another episode. He was an absolute iconoclast.
Yeah. So, okay, here's on a little further, page 19, book 2, line 9. He's telling himself this. This is Marcus Aurelius sitting down, like telling himself, don't ever forget these things. The nature of the world, my nature, how I relate to the world, and what proportion of it I make up. That you are part of nature and no one can prevent you from speaking and acting in harmony with it always. And in particular, I want to highlight this aspect. He says, don't forget these things. The nature of the world, right? So he's focusing on logos, how things are, right? Just being objective. My nature, he's probably speaking to the mind, right? And how I relate to the world. This is the thing. This is like the one thing that is in our control. How do you choose to relate to what happens in your life? And when he refers to the world, this is a really humbling statement. What proportion of it I make up? And here is an emperor of the largest empire at that time, and really for what's been on the history of Earth, humanity.
Genghis Khan would like a word.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. One of the largest. He says to remind himself what proportion of the world I make up. It's one man. And multiple times throughout this, he repeatedly reminds himself, it's just one life. It's one man. And so it's not about seeking glory or fame or even being remembered by your posterity. I can't quote this, but even later on, he has a line that says, what use is it to have fame when the people who will remember your name after you're gone will themselves die, and those after them will die, and then on and on. He just really takes the point home that it's just not about, the so-called successes of man at the time, which, by the way, I'll say are the exact same trappings of modern day man.
Absolutely. And I mean, again, we come back to the fact that like this is the private, essentially, diary or journal of an emperor, like literally an emperor. This isn't like someone with nothing at stake, right? Like, there are plenty of Roman emperors that were complete tyrants, that were absolutely horrific human beings. And this is a man in the same position as them, but he has chosen something radically different. And I mean, it's really exceptional. It's truly exceptional. You read about these leaders in history, these like mythic figures almost, who you can kind of romanticize as, oh, they were this perfect human who was only did good things and completely had the good of humanity or whatever in their minds and hearts at all time, and you can kind of have like rose tinted glasses on. But this is truly like, I don't know much about Marcus Aurelius outside of this book. I'm not a student of Roman history by any imagination, but like, this is a really genuine, heartfelt journal about someone who's trying to always show up and be as good as they can be. It's really sweet. It's really exceptional.
I found it very telling that actually in this journal, the very first book or the very first chapter is actually his gratitude to everyone he's ever met in his life. Like, he literally is like, actually, no, the title of book 1 is Debts and Lessons. And he lists, I'll give you an example. Number 1, my grandfather, Verus, character and self-control. He lists what he learned from him. My father, from my own memories and his reputation, integrity and manliness, right? My mother, her reverence for the divine, her generosity, her inability not only to do wrong, but even to conceive of doing it, and the simple way she lived, not in the least like the rich. And keep in mind, he was the adopted son of the emperor at the time. He wasn't the blood son, and so he wasn't born into aristocracy, the Roman aristocracy. I think it was a common practice at that time for emperors to adopt sons and have them become their heirs. But I just think it's so sweet. It's like he's writing down all the people who have impacted him and how and why and what he's learned. And I read this, and it's really beautiful. He's all these people and teachers that he's learned from. I thought about doing that myself. I was like, well, let me take some time, sit down, and list the names of all the people in my life that have had an impact on me and what I learned from them, what qualities they've taught me, how I've grown from them, what are my debts and lessons to the characters in the drama and play of my life.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great practice. I love it. And this was actually, this was a practice, right? So part of Stoicism at the time, especially, and I'm sure it's recommended today, is, the practice of journaling, the practice of reflecting. Like, that is, quote unquote, the practice of Stoicism, is this constant reflection, which I think is really great.
You got another quote for us?
Yeah, I think I do, but you know what I actually want to do is I want to spend a little time. We could quote Marcus Aurelius for a while.
That's true.
And we could, talk about him. And I think we've covered him a lot, but I really would love to just discuss some of these principles with you, because I find myself, I've compared a lot of them to Buddhism right now, but I really want to actually talk about them without just saying, oh, that's just like Buddhism.
Yeah.
So do you want to take some of these and maybe just hash them out?
So there's one that I want to take, which is called, so we talked about amor fati, which is the love of fate, which is accepting what is. The other one that I really liked was Deo volente. Deo volente means God, it's literally God willing. Deus is God, and volente is will. So God willing, which by some modern teachers is called the reserve clause, which is saying you're going to do what you feel is best in this moment, right? Let's say I'm starting a business, right? And I don't really know how to go about my marketing strategy, but from what I've learned and what I feel to do, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. I'm going to take these actions. And my goal is to have success in this particular way. Now, that would be fine to end right there, that this is my goal. But I think the Stoic would say, this is my goal, Deo volente, God willing, right? Which is very interesting because in Islam and Christianity, there's that idea. In Islam, you'd say, inshallah, right? Which also is, if God wills. In Christianity, you would say, God willing, right? But it's the idea that as a human being, you will take action of your own free will to pursue what you think is the greatest good for yourself and those around you. But you understand that you don't have the bird's eye view. You don't have the big picture, that there is something higher than you, maybe deeper than you, something about the universe, or what Marcus would say, like logos, that's part of the plan. And if your goal is not part of that plan, then it won't happen. And a Stoic would be okay with that. They'd be like, yep, what happens is what is meant to happen. And there's a really great way of Stoicism, a great way that Stoicism teaches one to accept what is. And that is also very common in modern cognitive behavioral psychology, is super common in Buddhism and different philosophical traditions. But, you offer that, God willing, reserve clause in order to be in harmony with what is.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is what comes to my mind when you talk about this is it's like a remedy for like decision paralysis. So there are, we all know somebody, maybe it's us, who, is constantly worried about which decision is the best decision to make. If I make this decision, what are the bad things that are going to happen? Like, how do I make the right decision? And I think that in a line with this kind of Stoic philosophy is really using the information that you have and doing the best you can. And that's all you can do, right? Like, there's no presumption, like you're saying, we don't have the bird's eye view. We don't know. We don't have this view of time that is outside of what we see in front of us. We can't know what the best decision is. And in fact, it's probably, anyway, I don't want to get into that. I'm going to get into technicalities.
I just remembered a quote that actually relates to just this.
Yeah, great.
I read this quote. I'm just going to give some context for anyone who's listening and might resonate with this. There were moments in my life when I was a lot younger where I was depressed, and there were moments where I was in bed. I got up and I didn't want to pull the covers off. I didn't want to start my day. I didn't see the point in it. And it's to all of those who may feel that, I'm going to read this, because this is what Marcus Aurelius would say to that person. And this is interesting. It's a little bit of a long quote. This is basically him having a dialogue with himself. And I imagine Marcus Aurelius actually in bed, nice and cozy, trying to convince himself to get up and start his day, even though he doesn't want to. At dawn, when you have trouble getting out of bed, tell yourself, I have to go to work as a human being. What do I have to complain of? If I'm going to do what I was born for, the things I was brought into the world to do. Or is this what I was created for? To huddle under the blankets and stay warm. But it's nicer here. That's the other part of him that says that. So you were born to feel nice instead of doing things and experiencing them? Don't you see the plants, the birds, the ants and spiders and bees going about their individual tasks, putting the world in order as best they can? And you're not willing to do your job as a human being? Why aren't you running to do what your nature demands? But we have to sleep sometime. Agreed, but nature set a limit on that, as it did on eating and drinking, and you're over the limit. You've had more than enough of that, but not of working. There, you're still below your quota.
I love it. Absolutely.
That's cute.
I don't relate at all.
Of course you wouldn't.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
It's nice because it's like you don't need to worry about what you're supposed to do. I think it's like, I was sharing this with someone. This might be a little controversial, maybe to some, but in the West, especially in the modern day, there's this obsession with what is my purpose, as if it's like there is some written out purpose for every single person out there, and we spend half our lives finding out what it is you're supposed to do, all the while living in this uncertainty of like, well, I have to find my purpose. I think Marcus Aurelius would say, just get up. And then what did he say? Get up and do what you are meant to do. Do your job as a human being. Look at the plants, the birds, the ants, and the bees going about their individual tasks. putting the world in order as best they can. Hey, there you go. It's right there.
I like that. Yeah, I like that a lot. I'm definitely I'm someone who's on the far spectrum of action over thought, right? Like I'm someone who, when I get into something, when I'm like interested in something, I go like full blast, 1,000 miles an hour, and then I like do some of it, and then I decide, most of the time that's not for me or whatever, but I got some experience and everything. And then there are people who are, again, the decision paralysis, like you're saying, like, what am I supposed to do? And there, people who are really waiting for like the universe or whatever to like show them what they're supposed to do. And I've always found that by doing things, like that's how you learn if you like it or not.
Yeah.
Right? Because there's a lot of people who are, whether they want to be an artist or whether they want to do X, Y, Z. But then if you actually like put them in a situation where they have to do it professionally all day long, like they start hating it, right? Like, like that's the classic. My wife's a graphic designer, so I've seen this trope in her world is, people who are professional artists, and it kind of like sucks the love of art from them. Right. And obviously this is a beautiful art studio here. So there's love there. But like, there's this sense that like you do it for a living. You don't want to do it when you're done, if you're done with your workday. But I feel like if you're not out there trying things, if you're not out there in action, even if you don't know if it's for sure, right? You don't have to have this like perfect picture of like, what is the perfect thing for me, but you can just try stuff. You can just do things and see what works and what doesn't. And that's how you gain wisdom. For me, that's been a real source of wisdom is, the fact that I've tried different careers, that I've tried different hobbies, that I have all these things that like have added to my life in so many different ways. And none of them they're not the thing that I'm doing forever, right? None of them are like my life's long passion, but they're things that I've enjoyed, and I just take it as that.
Yeah.
I don't get lost in the search for, finding the thing that is the one thing I will wake up every single day and love every moment of.
Right. And I think I can't help but...
Thank you for coming to my TED Talk, Adam.
Oh, that should have been slower. Sorry. There we go.
I was imagining all the really chorus of applause.
Yeah.
But you had me there.
One of these days.
Cold water, Adam.
Cold water. Actually, this reminds me of... so one of the things that people might say when you say, well, go and do what you feel like doing, there's a fear of failure, right? There's a fear of, I'm not going to succeed at what I do.
I have bad news for those people. You're just going to fail.
That's what I say. Yeah. Yeah.
There's one of my favorite quotes of all time is Michael Jordan quote. And it's something like, I've missed over what is it? Oh, hold on. You keep talking. I'm going to find it. It's exactly to do with this.
Go ahead. I think I know where you're going with this.
It was my mantra. Yeah, you probably do. My mantra for years.
Yeah. I think you're looking for the exact number of shots he's missed.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I'm going to take a guess. All right. While you're looking for it, I have no idea, but I'm going to guess 5,000, maybe 5,500. Wait, no. Let's see. He's been around for 20 years. I have no idea. I don't know Michael Jordan enough. I'm sorry for all those basketball fans out there. I know I've disappointed you.
God.
The show, the floor.
Oh, no, I found it. Shit.
How many did he...
Okay.
How many shots did he...
Ready?
Yeah.
I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career.
I was close.
I've lost almost 300 games. 26 times I've been trusted to take the game-winning shot and missed. I've failed over and over and over again in my life. And that is why I succeed. There's another quote. So that quote used to give me chills. Like, I love that quote. And there's another quote that I love too. The expert has failed more times than the novice has even tried.
Oh, wow. I haven't heard that one. That's great.
Yeah.
I have something Stoicism related to this.
I bet you do.
Oh, okay. So did my research. So Epictetus is the slave Stoic, right? Who actually managed to make his way into Marcus Aurelius's meditations. Like, he was that influential. He talks about using challenges to strengthen oneself, or given what we were talking about, using the failure as fuel for the fire. He says, imagine the gods seeing that you are ready to grow and you're walking in the nature, sending you a young buck to fight with, right? With the idea that you're going to come across the challenge, because the Stoics kind of believe that there were these gods and the gods would give them what they needed.
You mean modern day 21st century Stoics, right? You mean like
Well, no, Epictetus and
young
the like.
man number 2074 who's trying to start his new tech startup for the app that's going to change the
Yeah.
world? That guy?
To him, keep in mind that there are Stoic gods out there who are capricious. Kidding. So there, for Epictetus, that there were gods who would bring down challenges for you. And he says, imagine that the gods give you a young buck. That is for you to wrestle with. That is for you to fight with. And through that, you become all the more stronger. And the other thing that was described about in my reading regarding Stoicism is this idea of like, you can imagine yourself as a candle flame. If there's a big gust of wind, right, the candle flame will be blown out. But if you become a fire, like a strong fire, and that same gust of wind comes, it will fuel the fire and the fire will grow and it will spread. So it's the idea that you get to the point where you are like consuming the challenges of life. You eat it up, you take it on, you face what you're afraid of, you face the challenge, and then because you know you will get stronger through it. And so then it's at a point where like you're looking for that next challenge. You're looking for what life throws at you. And Seneca, with another famous Stoic, who was actually the mentor of Nero, one of the most horrible people in human history, and a horrible emperor by all accounts. Seneca tried his best, I think, to steer him in the right direction, but ended up being forced to commit suicide by Nero's decree. Seneca was the one that said, we must always be ready for the challenges that life will throw against us because it will happen. And I like that way of looking at things. It's like you said, Stephen, failure is going to happen. Your choice, your only control is how are you going to choose to react to it? How are you going to respond to the challenge that life throws at you?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's directly tied into this idea of Stoic cognition, the idea that things are happening and then we have these impressions of them and those impressions may or may not be correct. Is, life is happening to us and we don't get to always choose what happens, right? In fact, very rarely do we choose. We might choose the direction we head, but we don't choose, what the path looks like necessarily. But that is our choice to act, right? And it's our choice to take action. And we have no control over the things. Obviously, you're talking about locus of control,
Yeah.
right? We just keep coming back to these same things. We don't have control over these things, and we just have the choice to act. And so there's this additional attitude of, using challenges as fuel for the fire, which, makes, coming from an emperor, total sense, right? Because this is a man whose life is full of challenges, right? And he talks about them in detail in this book, whether it be court life or wars, he's faced with, that his empire is faced with. So it's full of it.
Yeah. I want to dive in a little bit into the metaphysics of Stoicism, which
Okay, let's do it.
I don't think I've really tried to do my research in this field. And Stoicism, I think one of its appeals to the modern man is the fact that it's not religious. It gets at which I think also, incidentally, is the appeal to Buddhism.
You mean modern Stoicism is not religious?
Yes.
You mean
yes.
secular Stoicism in modern times,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Well said.
You don't mean Stoicism, you mean current 21st century Stoicism.
Yeah, the way we interpret Stoicism now. Back
Yeah.
then, this is the point that I want to make, that
There's nothing on my shoulder about this, just want to be very clear.
except the giant chip.
Maybe we'll get into it someday, I don't know.
Okay, so what I noticed is that in the modern way of talking about Stoicism, there's no talk about a metaphysics behind it, which is to say, like, the big picture, like a non-physical understanding of reality, like what is behind the veil, or if there even is a veil, so to speak, like, is there more than just physical reality? Right? Like, is there life after death, right? Does the mind continue onward? Like, these are questions that I'm sure Marcus Aurelius thought about. And so he offers a possibility of what he thinks might happen, but he himself even says something to the fact that This is one possibility, which is to say, like, if this was him writing to himself, he didn't really know what was after death, or he certainly didn't have a strong belief in it. So, okay, this is page 4121. Oh, by the way, we didn't mention this, but Stephen and I are reading from a modern translation.
Oh, good call. That's important.
Yeah, of Meditations by Gregory Hayes, a new translation with an introduction. The reason why this was chosen is because there's so many different forms of this, but this one was translated particularly for the modern, I think, a contemporary understanding of Marcus Aurelius' written language. So he says, if our souls survive, how does the air find room for them? All of them, since the beginning of time. How does the earth find room for all the bodies buried in it since the beginning of time? They linger for whatever length of time, and then, through change and decomposition, make room for others. So too with the souls that inhabit the air. They linger a little, and then are changed, diffused and kindled into fire, absorbed into the logos from which all things spring, and so make room for new arrivals. One possible answer. But we shouldn't think only of the mass of buried bodies. There are the ones consumed on a daily basis by us and by other animals. How many are swallowed up like that, entombed in the bodies of those nourished by them? And yet there is room for them all, converted into flesh and blood, transformed to air and fire. How is the truth of this determined? Through analysis, material, and cause. To me, when I read that, I think that he sees life as a huge cycle. In a later quote, he says, all of the world is one being, that has an order to it. He uses the word souls and divine, but he says that even after death, souls go into the air, right, and are dissolved and converted into something new. And so I think that's, at least Marcus Aurelius is, and I think he's emblematic of a lot of the ancient Stoics as well, that we are part of the universe. We're part of the cosmos. And when we die, this life is over. It never comes back, and it gets recycled into the universe in a large cycle upon cycle of change. And he talks multiple times in this book about how change is like the one constant of life. We know it, things will change. That, to me, is the closest I think Marcus Aurelius gets to a metaphysics.
Yeah. And I mean, and that's, again, it's very practical. And I find myself reflecting on things similarly. And this is kind of, as we're talking about I know we're trying to find some sort of metaphysics. And I agree with you that it kind of, and it could be, this could be because my understanding of like Roman and Greek, I'm bunching them together here, but really the gods, it wasn't like modern religions where the divine dictates day-to-day activities, right? They were more about your devotion and reliance on them, and as you're saying, God willing, right? But there wasn't like a moral code of conduct that God prescribed, right? In the way that Christianity or Islam or Hinduism or Buddhism does. It was much more, there was a big separation between the religious life and the private life. And so that's why something like this, where you can kind of ruminate on metaphysics, and it really has nothing to do with the Roman gods, right? They're almost like separate in his mind, it seems. And in a way that doesn't make sense to the modern reader, because that's pretty much no matter what culture you're brought up in, the religion of your culture has a set of ethics.
Yeah.
and they're very related to the religion. And that just wasn't the case back then. And so it's, we're getting these Stoicism isn't supposed to necessarily answer those questions, right? It does get into them, and it does have these assumptions about the world, the idea of a soul and things like that. And it has these assumptions, but it doesn't really flesh them out. It's not a theology, right? It's about that to me, it's, especially the way Marcus Aurelius writes about it, it's really about the practical day-to-day aspect. And that's kind of what I want to talk about, because obviously this is something that I consider all the time. And so, I've been doing a lot of gardening recently. We have a house for the first time. We have a big, beautiful backyard that we're planting like crazy in. And I'm often thinking, there's a lot of like worms in the soil or bugs. I like dig up mulch and there's like a bajillion centipedes scatter everywhere. And I'm always thinking about like what kind of life I'm disturbing, right? And that these are animals, these are creatures that want to live just like I do. And right, and the decisions that I'm making, when I dig up a chunk of soil and put it somewhere, like how many beings am I killing, right? Like how much life am I disrupting? And instead of being like overwhelmed, right, you could, the extreme version of this is Jainism, just for anybody interested.
They wear masks that don't breathe in microscopic insects.
They wear masks and they don't go outside in the monsoon season for fear of crushing crushing anything underfoot, things like that. And anyway, we're not talking about Jainism, but it's not to be paralyzed by this understanding. It's to really like be humbled by it, right? The decisions we make have consequence, right? They do affect other people, other creatures. And then at the same time, as important as our lives seem to us right now, 500, 1,000 years, who will remember? Just like he said, one of the original quotes you had about fame, like not really worrying about fame is, for me, it comes back to how is this action I'm taking right now affecting the lives of others around me, whether they be big or small, and some of those decisions I make and I say, like, I'm not really willing to compromise on this. Like, this is something that I feel I have to do, whether it be the food that I eat or the fact that I'm gardening, right? Like, I really want to grow beautiful food, plants full of food to feed me. So, like, I have to make a decision. Like, okay, I have to disrupt this life, right? But at least you're conscious of it. At least you're aware of it and you're respecting it. And I think, for me, that's what Stoicism comes back to is this contemplation, this moment by moment, like contemplation and consideration of the decisions we're making.
Marcus Aurelius had to make similar decisions. As an emperor, he would go and lead.
Gardening? He was a big gardener?
It's possible.
He made the same decisions I'm making, Adam?
Just some decisions with apparent gravitas. It might be a little bit more weighty of a decision than yours.
Which Germanic tribe to slay next?
He had to decide who to kill. Like which armies to destroy, and he was pretty successful actually in his campaigns. But the life of a centipede and the life of a Germanic warrior, like same. So, but here's the thing: this is not an emperor who I think would have treated the loss of a life callously. Let me just read this quote, perhaps one of our last in this episode, page 27. In Book 3, sentence number 2, we should remember that even nature's inadvertence has its own charm, its own attractiveness. The way loaves of bread split open on top in the oven. The ridges are just byproducts of the baking, and yet pleasing somehow. They rouse our appetite without our knowing why. Or how ripe figs begin to burst. And olives on the point of falling, the shadow of decay gives them a peculiar beauty. Stalks of wheat bending under their own weight, the furrowed brow of the lion, flecks of foam on the boar's mouth. I feel like here's someone who is very attentive to nature.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I have no doubt he very much considered the fact that he was ending the lives of others. But it's like he said at the beginning, do your job. He was the emperor, and he had to make safe his empire, so he made decisions.
Yeah.
And that is... so, Stephen, tell me, how would you... This was the first time that you really dived into and explored Stoicism, right?
For sure.
So, having been exposed to it, at least Marcus Aurelius's version of it, what are your thoughts? What's a takeaway? What's your takeaway?
My thoughts
straight
are
up.
if I... Straight up?
Straight up.
Wait, really?
I mean,
right.
Yeah, just don't PG-13, buddy.
Listeners of the show, we've talked about a lot of religions. I am openly religious. I've talked about, my Buddhist life in pretty much every episode. And I have a personality that's really well suited for religion, turns out. But there's probably a lot of you listening that aren't. And I really feel like if you want a philosophy that has pretty much the good stuff that comes, that I've found in the religions I've practiced without any of the religious trappings. Stoicism, you should check it out. It seems like an incredibly useful, practical, humble tool and philosophy for navigating day-to-day life. And I really genuinely can't think of a better one that doesn't, unless you start going into religions. And that's just my personal take on religions too. I mean, I think it's, for all intents and purposes of, as far as like day-to-day life goes, I think it's exceptional.
That's great. Yeah.
What about you? You know what Stoicism was before this episode, yeah?
Right. I think I first really dived into Stoicism about a year ago, but really in preparation for this episode, this last month, I've been reading a lot, watching a lot, and sort of studied Seneca, studied Epictetus, Cato, Zeno, and Marcus Aurelius. What I got out of all of it is this is so critical of a foundation. If every single human being took on these principles, I think there would be far less suffering in the world. And these principles, incidentally, I think are bubbling up in mass awareness, mass consciousness, in the form of cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, in the form of modern psychology, humanistic psychology, transpersonal psychology, in the way that we understand modern sociology. The idea of Graves's spiral dynamics was this idea of how
you can't be making stuff up like this.
I am not. Spiral dynamics, check it out. I think Beck and Graves
All right.
are the last names of the people. This idea that humanity sociologically is evolving and having greater and greater perspectives of itself. And the relationship between the individual to society is itself shifting as... Let me give you a brief example of what I mean by spiral dynamics is 1,000 years ago, maybe more, 3,000 years ago, we existed as individuals of tribes, right? And then who we were was the tribe, and we had to fight off animals, and the lightning that came down had its own will, and we were being punished by the gods, right? It was a very magical, animistic world. And then that expanded to nation states, right? I'm jumping several layers here. And then who we were was the nation state. Like, I am a Roman, I'm part of the Roman Empire, and then it still has the us then dynamic, but the sense of self has now expanded to something much larger. The modern equivalent of that is patriotism, right? Like nationalistic fervor comes from that sense of self-identity. Yeah. But then that expands even further where you see yourself as a global citizen. You are a human being, and we share that sameness. And I think Marcus Aurelius would sort of see himself as a human, part of a grand cycle that is the universe, that is one with Logos. He even says, like, I am one with Logos. And so what I would say, going back to the original thought, is that Stoicism captures some of these fundamental ideas, and I'll recap some of them here for those who want a summary.
Yeah.
You can't control everything that happens in life, but you can control how you perceive life. And to a certain extent, your behavior and the actions that you take. But your ability to be aware of your mind and decide how your mind functions, what you think, and how you respond to life, that is within your control. And an aspect of how you respond is, do you shy away from the challenges that life throws at you? Or do you say, bring it on, knowing that you're going to grow from it? And that would be amor fati. And then there's this idea of deo volente, like being willing to allow something unexpected to happen and going with the flow, rolling with the punches and being in harmony with what is. I think those would be some of the core tenets of Stoicism. And like I said, I would suggest take one of those things, one of the ideas that you heard Steve and I talk about, and see how it is to apply that in your life. I'm sure it's going to be helpful.
Beautiful. Beautifully said.
That's what I would have to say. What are we going to do next, Stephen? What's our next episode?
You know what I really want to do is I want to do Pyrrho.
What? What is that?
Pyrrhonism. So this idea that Buddhists met Greeks in Afghanistan, and then Greece imported Buddhist philosophy.
Ooh.
A lot of Buddhist philosophy. Yeah.
Yeah, Greek philosophy meets Buddhism. That sounds exciting.
That's my own personal interest. But I think we have this huge list of books that we want to do, and every time we're like, Adam and I will say, oh, we should like really do like 4 or 5 episodes on like this topic, right? It would be like Christian mystics, like we have this Christian mystics episode that was like been percolating for a while, or like doing like keeping on the like with the Masters of the Far East, doing like Krishnamurti and other like things that came out of theosophy, like Western esotericism, and then something like this happens where it's like, hey, let's do Stoicism. Want to do Stoicism? Okay, great. And then like all of our plans go out the window. So like, I think we have like a Christian mystics, some more Christian mystics in the oven.
I really want to do Saint Teresa of Avila.
Yeah, we have.
She's so good.
And Meister Eckhart.
Meister Eckhart, yeah.
And then
these guys were so good.
Yeah, and then like Krishnamurti and his whole trajectory, which is fascinating.
That's fascinating.
Sri Aurobindo.
Wow,
I mean, there's so many of these exceptional mystics, and that's. I mean, I guess we're covering a philosopher now, so maybe the next one we should do a mystic. Maybe we should. We've done with like the headiness of philosophy, and maybe we dive into like heady. Someone who like experienced miracles and
who levitated
the divine,
apparently,
and who levitated. Oh, really? You're gonna like disclaim that? Apparently, she levitated. I don't believe her.
Oh, I have so much to say. Okay, great. Well, for those of you listening, if this episode is on YouTube and you're watching this on YouTube, fingers crossed, put it in the comments what you want us to do next. And for those listening on other formats, go to our Discord or go to our website, letterstothesky.com, send us an email, or shout our names really, really loud. There is a possibility we might hear. Possibility.
Yeah. Guys, I've just gotten my second COVID shot, so I have really good 5G reception. And if you scream really loud, there's a chance that Bill Gates will patch you through to me.
Yeah, the microchip in your body now.
Yeah.
Oh, great.
So scream really loud. Scream loud at the topic you want us to do, and I'll get it here. Ooh, no, here.
On that note, peace out, Stephen.
Goodbye, Adam.